So she said my message was entitled The Center of the Universe. And you know, we human beings, sometimes we like to think we're the center of the universe, don't we? And there was centuries, for a lot of human history, we thought that our little planet Earth was the center of the universe. And it was such a strong belief, and the church believed, the Bible taught that the Earth was the center of the universe. And so anybody that tried to say otherwise, the church really would go after them. It'd come down hard on them. It was such a point that when the astronomer Copernicus studied the stars and the planets and the movements of the moon and the earth, and Copernicus, his scientific study concluded that it was the sun and not the earth that was the center of the solar system. But he was so afraid to release his findings that he waited until he was on his deathbed to actually publish his work. And then later, another famous astronomer you might have heard of, Galileo, he believed the same thing, and when he dared to say that, the church and the government, which was very much tied together back then, they put Galileo under house arrest for the last 9 years of his life because he dared to say the earth was not the center of the universe. We just like to feel like we're the most important thing, don't we? Whether that's our planet or us as individuals, sometimes feeling like we want to be the center of the universe. We want everything else to revolve around us. Well, now we know that not only is the earth not the center of the solar system, but we're not the only solar system. Our sun is just one of billions of stars in our one galaxy that we call the Milky Way that we live in. Not only that, but our galaxy, which has billions of suns or stars, is only one of billions of other galaxies that they've seen through powerful telescopes they have now. Have y'all ever heard of the Hubble Telescope? Named after a scientist named James Hubble. The Hubble Telescope, I think it was launched in the 90s, and it's been sending back some pretty amazing images. When you're online sometime, just look up the Hubble Telescope images and see some of the incredible things that they've seen through that telescope. I have one of those images that I want to show you today that I printed out for my bulletin board that I had at school a couple of years ago, and I've actually kept that bulletin board because I'm rather proud of it. But the bulletin board says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And I have several pictures on there of different things from either the Hubble Telescope, or there's a picture of the earth taken from space, and there's just a lot of things on there. One of these images, the way they captured it is what is interesting to me. They took this Hubble Telescope and they aimed it at a dark place in the sky where it looked like there was nothing. And they turned on the Hubble Telescope and aimed it at this darkness. And, you know, it magnifies things millions of times. And they took a picture. And in the middle of this darkness that looked like there was nothing, I want to show you what they captured.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you see all of these points of light on here. Every single point of light, whether it's a bigger one like some of these or a tiny one, every single one of those is an entire galaxy full of stars.
Cool.
And there's probably hundreds on this one image. And that's just one little bitty tiny spot in the night sky that we can see. And if they were to point it at any other of the millions of spots in the sky, they would see the same thing. That all around us are countless worlds, galaxies, stars. And how do we think that our little selves are the center of anything? Do you feel small yet this morning?
Very.
You feel kind of small, and compared to that, insignificant? It's easy to feel that way. So you go from feeling like you're the center of the universe to now realizing how small we are. Well, there's a story in the Gospel of Mark about two of Jesus' disciples that maybe they thought they were at the center of the universe. At the time, they knew who Jesus was. They realized he was God's Son, that he was the Messiah. Peter famously in the Gospel said the words when Jesus said, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And they all believed that. They all knew that Jesus was the center of the universe. But then they thought, what can I get out of it? How can I be closer to the center of the universe? And I want to read you this passage out of Mark chapter 10, verse 35 through 45. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit on your right and the other on your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup that I drink, and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. The words of Jesus this morning. These two disciples were quite brave, weren't they?
Yes.
They were, some believe, part of the inner circle of disciples. You had 12 apostles, and occasionally Jesus would take 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, and take them aside and tell them something extra, or took them up on a mountain and transfigured before them. And so maybe they thought by this point, we're pretty important. So let's just go ahead and ask for what we really want. So they go up to Jesus. Will you do something for us, Jesus? And he said, well, what do you want me to do for you? And they said, we want to be your right and left hand men when you come into your kingdom. And the problem with that is their idea of Jesus coming into his kingdom was not Jesus' idea of coming into his kingdom. You see, at this point, the disciples, they believed he was the Messiah, but they thought he was going to be this great war general, that he was going to gather an army of Jews around him and, with the power of God on his side, conquer the Romans and basically make Israel an independent nation again, like it was in the days of David and Solomon. They thought Jesus was going to be like Judas Maccabeus. Many of you might never have heard of him, but Maccabeus would be like George Washington is to us. You know, George Washington is this legendary figure in our history that led us to victory over the British. The first president, by all accounts, a very good leader. That's who Maccabeus was to the Jews. And it had been nearly 200 years since Maccabeus led a revolution against the empire and led them to victory. Now, unfortunately, the empire came back and reconquered them. But still, Jesus was supposed to be the next Maccabeus. He was supposed to be raising up an army. And so far, he hadn't done that. So maybe James and John thought, now's a good time to ask for these spots. Before all of these other people come and follow Jesus, you know, we're right here at Jesus' side now while he's still not that well known. So let's ask him now, Jesus, whenever you become king, whenever you lead your armies to victory, we want to be by your side. We want to be at the most important positions. We want to be at the center of the universe, in other words. And I almost picture Jesus laughing a little bit, saying, you don't know what you're asking for. Because they really didn't. They didn't understand. When Jesus came into his kingdom, first of all, when he rode into town, he didn't show up on a war horse leading an army, did he? When he rode into town, he was riding a young donkey, which was a sign of not war, but peace. And then, when he came into his kingdom, he wasn't seated on a throne. He wasn't holding a scepter or wearing a royal robe. In fact, they put those things on him to mock him. And then they took the robe and rolled dice for it, gambled for it. No, Jesus was on a cross when he came into his kingdom, being crucified. And in one of the best pieces of irony, in my opinion, that's ever been written, in Mark chapter 15, you read these words. And with him, Jesus, they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. You can't make this up. Jesus told them, you don't know what you're asking for. Ask him to be on my right and my left when I come into my kingdom. Those positions are already reserved for somebody else. And it was two bandits, two thieves, some think two revolutionaries who had already revolted against the Romans, and that's why they were being crucified and made an example of, just like Jesus was being made an example of. And, you know, the famous story, one of the two asked Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom, and Jesus told him he would, that you will be with me today in paradise. James and John wanted to be at the center of the universe, but in their mind, that looked like gold and winning wars and being on top in this kingdom, in this world. But that's not the kind of king that Jesus was. That's not what he had come to do. James and John didn't understand that they were literally asking to be killed alongside him in that moment. Now we know that eventually James and John James would be killed fairly early in the book of Acts, if you read that book. John would live longer than any of the other apostles, but he also would suffer greatly because of his belief in Jesus. They weren't ready at the time, but eventually, when they understood, they would be. You know, quite often when we think that we are the center of the universe, then the universe has a way of showing us that we're not. Like this picture here. How we couldn't take a microscope and go in far enough to see a planet in one of these galaxies. And think about how small we are compared to what's out there in the universe. This universe that God created is so vast. It's easy to go from feeling like we're on top to feeling like we're nothing. But the good news is God is the one that's the center of the universe. And for some reason that I may never understand, he decided to single out this one little planet called Earth and actually walk with his own 2 feet on it. And actually loves us on this little tiny dot, this little tiny speck. He loves us enough to suffer on a cross so that we can come to know him better. And he told the disciples at the end of this passage that I was reading earlier, the disciples heard about what James and John had asked, and they were all mad at him. Probably because they didn't think of it first, to be honest. It says, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and he said, you know those that are regarded as the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This story also reminded me of Job a little bit. When we look through the book of Job, we see a man that suffered that was innocent. He lost everything, and even his own body was afflicted. He was in pain, in anguish, in more ways than I can probably ever understand. And he thought the universe worked a certain way. He thought that if he was good, good things would happen to him. And that if bad things happened, he must have done wrong. And that's what Job's friends were trying to convince Job of, and trying to tell him, you had to have done something wrong, you need to confess it, and maybe God will forgive you. And Job kept saying, no, I'm innocent, I've done nothing wrong. And if I could get God here and sit him down and talk to him, then he would understand my side of the story. Well, it takes 38 chapters, but in the book of Job, we finally hear from God. He finally shows up and speaks out of a whirlwind to Job. And it's a long passage, but me being a fan of astronomy, one of my favorite portions I want to read. This is out of Job chapter 38, verses 31 to 33. God asked Job a series of questions, and here are some of them. He asks, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? The Pleiades are a set of stars. If you probably know Orion is one of the constellations, one of the most prominent that you can see. The Pleiades are a set of stars that are kind of to the east of Orion. And, the Greek mythology is Orion the hunter is pursuing all the daughters of Atlas, the Pleiades as they're called. But the writer of Job in God's voice here is bringing up, Job, are you the one that put all of these stars, all of these galaxies in the sky? Can you lead out the constellations? Do you know the laws of the heavens, the laws of physics that hold everything together? Can you set up God's dominion, my dominion, God is saying, over the earth? And of course, the answer to all these questions, Job doesn't have to say is no. The point of this passage is God is showing Job, you're not the center of the universe. Sometimes bad things happen. It doesn't mean you're insignificant, that you're nothing, because God loves you. God came to this world. God came down to talk to Job. The God that threw all of those things into the galaxies, into the heavens, came down just to talk to Job in this story. To show Job, you're not insignificant, but you're also not the center of the universe. God was saying, I am. I created all these things, including you. And at the end of all of this, we want answers. Why does Job have to suffer? We don't really get answers to that. The only answer we get is that God is still with us. That God takes time out of what we might say is his busy schedule to love each one of us, to comfort us in our times of loss, to walk with us through our trials and our hard times. So when we start to think about how great we are, remember how small we are. But at the same time, though we are so small, God walks with us. God loves us as individual people. And he takes the time for us. That it's amazing to me that he does. When he has all of these things, God has all of these things he's created. And yet, he takes time for us. And yet, he walks with us. So remember, the center of the universe is him. And it's Jesus Christ. And yet, we get to walk with him. As small as we are, we get to walk with him. We get to have his presence, his very spirit within us as we go through this world. And like he said, Jesus said, even he did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life. So when we start thinking about how great we are and maybe what we think we deserve or don't deserve, remember, even the one who is the center of the universe said, I came to serve. And we follow his example. We lay down our lives the way he did to serve other people and bring his presence out into the world and the places that we go. So where is it that God has sent you to serve? Your home, your job, in my case, the school where I work, the community you live in, your neighbors around you. Where is it that he is sending you to not be the center of the universe, not seek credit for all of these things, but to point the way to the one that is the center of the universe by being a servant, by loving your neighbor?